Today is Thursday, May 8th, 2025, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, here once again with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, how are we doing this morning?
Doing really well. It's only 11 o'clock, and I feel like it's been a busy day. Anyway,
Yes.
It's been a good, busy day. It's nice to get things, nice to be productive here at the end of the week.
And you're prepping for the upcoming Council of Elders.
We are. There's a lot of that going on, that's to be sure.
Okay, we teased on one of our recent podcasts a guest that we were hoping to get, and we have been successful. Do you want to talk about our guest today?
I do, actually. We have with us the Director of Church Administration, Dr. Douglas Winnail. Dr. Winnail, you want to say hi to everybody?
Greetings, everybody. It's good to talk with you. We've got a beautiful day here in Charlotte. I wish you could be here.
Yeah, and you'll be here audibly, but you won't be here visit. We won't see you. So anyway, that's what we're doing today. We're talking to Dr. Douglas Winnail. Welcome back, and thank you again for tuning in, all of you who listen, teens and young adults, and all the many who tend to tell us, hey, I'm not young, but I listen too. Is that okay? And of course, we're not going to send police or anything to arrest you. We sure enjoy having you as well. And thank you again to Dr. Winnail. For those who aren't aware, Dr. Douglas Winnail is an evangelist in the Living Church of God. He is the Director of Church Administration and the author of booklets, most recently the Biblical Health Booklet, which I think Rod McNair just recently offered on the telecast and got a good response to that. There's a lot of sick people out there, Dr. Winnail, who want a book on biblical principles of health. But thank you very much for taking the time to come and spend some time with us on the podcast.
You're welcome.
So we have some questions for you. What we like to do is we realize a lot of us here at headquarters, the youth, the teens, they don't really know us all that well. We don't get up in a sermon and talk about our lives or anything. And so the podcast is an opportunity to do that. So whenever they see us in a sermon or see us in something else, they have a sense of who we are. And so that's what we're hoping to do today, was just to ask you a few questions and give you an opportunity to talk about yourself a little bit, which you don't do that in sermons. You're very good about that. You want to get to the point, but here's an opportunity to actually let some of the young people know who you are and where you're coming from, and to kind of give some context in some of the things you say. So we just wanted to quiz you a little bit in terms of your life. For instance, we'll just start with the basics. Where did you grow up? What was your early life? Where was that?
I was born in Akron, Ohio. I grew up in Ohio and Pennsylvania in a small town, so I'm a Yankee.
We won't hold that against you.
Our home was on the edge of a small subdivision. We had a farm right behind us, and we would climb through the fence, and we viewed that farm as our farm. But we could climb over the pastures and walk around. It was really a lot of fun. A little stream behind us. We built a dam, and then the farmer came down and tore it down because it was right behind some houses, and they were afraid that they'd get a flood if they had a lake behind it. Anyways,
oh, wow.
My dad was a mechanical engineer, was into drafting, made machines for steel mills. My mom was a housewife and a Sunday school teacher.
Oh, really?
So I grew up with a biblical background, attended church, sang in choirs, went to summer camps, was a counselor at a summer camp, had a lot of fun that way. My dad would take vacations in the summertime. Usually we'd go to Canada, get a cabin on a lake, go fishing, and then run through the woods, my brother and I. We'd also go every other year to Cape May, New Jersey. So we'd spend time jumping in the waves in the ocean. And it was really a lot of fun growing up that way. In school, I think one of my favorite classes that I took as a 7th grader was woodshop. And I enjoyed working with wood.
We were talking about that just recently, that it seems like a lot of schools don't have shop anymore at some of those younger ages, right?
Now, they had a wood shop, and they had something about car mechanics, but I was into wood. And I wound up making furniture later for our boys as they got bigger. All we could afford was plastic furniture, and I didn't want to buy plastic. So I made bunk beds. I think John Hunter, his kids actually have some of those.
Oh, really?
Things still.
Wow.
But enjoyed doing that in school. I played a lot of basketball, played tennis and golf. My favorite subjects in school were history and biology, because we had a real cute biology teacher.
That's a good reason.
and enjoyed writing. Had an English teacher that said, "I'm going to make writers out of you." This is my second semester senior year. She said, "You're going to write a theme every week." So
Wow.
every Monday morning we had to turn in a one-page theme.
Wow.
And I really enjoyed that. I found out later that to be a good writer, you have to be creative and with creative ideas. You know, I tried to tell stories to our boys when they were little, and they carried on that creativity. I used to tell them stories that whenever my brother and I were little, we were so small that my mother picked us up in the vacuum cleaner as she was cleaning. So my son, youngest son, had to write a paper, and it was about the Mormons. And the teacher asked, "Why did the Mormons leave and move to another area?" He said they had stinky feet.
Is that true? Is that true?
That's true.
I had never heard that.
That he wrote that. That he wrote that. That's what's
okay,
true.
Okay.
The teacher didn't like it either, but he was being creative, just like his dad
That's
was.
funny. I was willing to buy that.
But it was interesting. Also, I think in high school, it was in a lot of clubs. I was a president of one or two, but we also had we had a quartet. There were about four of us actually. Our name was the Four Bachelors, so we had a lot of fun singing. But it was really interesting. We were sitting around a piano one night in my home with my mom listening, and we were trying to come up with a name for the quartet.
Band? Yeah.
And she finally kicked us out of the house because of some of the names that we were coming up with. But that was my schooling growing up. It was basically in Ohio and Pennsylvania.
So that to me sounds like one of the most quintessential kind of American experiences and upbringing. You know,
Yeah.
religious background, very involved in school, involved in a lot of activities, involved in clubs. I'll bet that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know, I've gone back to some high school reunions over the last several years, and we still get together because we grew up and going to school from about second grade for me until seniors. So it was pretty much the same group. Some people went away, moved away. Other people stayed there. And it's just interesting to compare notes.
It's neat. Are you able to still stay in touch? Are you able to? Yeah, I remember when I was pastoring there in the Ohio area, that's when I first found out that you had connections to Akron. Connected the tire industry at all in any way? I guess
My dad worked for Goodyear
Did
for a
he?
while as an engineer. I was born in Akron, and I still go back from time to time, partly for the reunions and partly to visit the congregations back
Oh,
there.
good. You know, I think Mr. Hagmeyer, who died just recently, the elder there, I think he had Goodyear background. I think he did.
Well, I wanted to ask, when did you start thinking about higher education? Was your plan always, hey, I want to go to college and get a degree, or did it kind of evolve as you were in high school? And were you? I was also curious. You know, was that something that was difficult to afford to get into college at that time?
Not really. My dad had a decent job. We weren't rich, but he did not go to college. But he took college classes in engineering on his own. I think probably a better half of the kids in my high school were planning to go to college.
Okay.
So it was just something that a lot of us expected to do. You know, like many young people growing up, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My dad wanted me to be an engineer because he was an engineer.
Right.
I enjoyed biology. I enjoyed stuff. I had an uncle that had a farm, dairy farm, about 100 acres, and I enjoyed working with him on the farm, driving a tractor, and he didn't want any help with the milking because the cows don't like strangers for milking. So I had a .22 rifle, and my job was to go through the hay fields and shoot the groundhogs if they were out. So every evening I'd do this. I knew where the holes were, and you had to stay downwind from them because otherwise they'd smell you coming.
Yeah.
And it was really ideal, really.
I may have had some experience doing the same thing in Texas.
You may have.
Now, other than cute teachers, clearly, eventually, biology or something was it an interest in biology that led you to be so focused on health education? Because that's what you eventually got your higher degrees in, right? With public health and things like
No,
that.
it was the cute T-shirt. No, my dad wanted to be an engineer. I started applying for college, and my mom had dated a guy from the school that I actually went to. It was an all-male school, and I thought this would be cool because I had a friend that was going to West Point. It was an all-male school. Another friend went to the Coast Guard Academy. It was an all-male school. So I thought it would just be different. During the initial interview, I said I'd like to be an engineer, and the guy looked at my test scores, and he said, "Why don't you become a doctor?" Because math was not my greatest subject. So it was the school was basically pre-med, pre-dent, pre-law, and business.
Okay.
And so I was a pre-med. I majored in pre-med in biology and fraternities.
So where did you go?
It was Washington Jefferson College.
Okay.
It was a Presbyterian school. It's one of the first colleges built west of the Alleghenies.
Huh.
It started about 1781 or something like that. It's
Wow.
old, almost as old as Harvard and Yale and so on.
Wow.
But it was a small school. I got involved in athletic activities, fraternity activities, but it was really interesting. I wanted to be a teacher. And then I found out later that most teachers didn't get paid during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
But when I graduated from college, went to medical school in the University of Mississippi. As a Yankee, I read Going with the Wind and some of those books to get ready for going to the South. There's a lot of dynamics going on in the South at that time.
Yeah, I bet.
But I bought a book on the history of medicine because I was always interested in history. The book on history of medicine that I bought talked about medicine in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in China, but it was also a section on ancient Hebrew medicine. Ancient Hebrew medicine. And what I noticed at that time, and this would have been probably 1965, 66, I noticed the difference there, that Hebrew medicine was focused on education, it was focused on prevention. So I noticed that at that time. That resulted eventually in the booklet that we published a couple years ago on biblical principles of health. And the booklet took the same approach, that it was very different. The Hebrews were not into drugs. I mean, they had some poultices and stuff like that, but they did not have an extensive list of medicines. But the Chinese did, the Egyptians did, they had the names of surgeons and so on. This was just not so.
They were more focused, you're saying, on trying to keep you healthy, right? So is that what you're saying?
It was partly the job of the ministers. The priests at that time, to explain biblical principles. You don't eat this, you don't eat that, you eat this, you eat that. Sanitation was a big thing. But the whole emphasis was not on treatment, it was on prevention. It was on education. It was not for sale. It was free. So it was a very different approach, but I noticed this at that time, and that came to fruition years later.
You know, I remember you. I think I've heard you share this experience a couple times. That once you got out of college and you had your degree and you started practicing, it didn't take long before you were a little bit frustrated by the expectation that you couldn't bring religious ideas into or principles into treating people.
You know, I got a PhD. I did not get an MD, so I never practiced, but I did teach. I taught for about 10 years in Pasadena at Ambassador College. And then whenever they closed the college, I went back to school and got another degree, a Master of Public Health degree. And that was basically on nutrition, health education, international health. Because once you learn all the bones and muscles, that's fine. And that was what I was going to teach in medical school if I would have stayed there. But I wanted to teach how to live, how to use that information. And it was just much more practical. I did spend a couple years teaching at a state college in Massachusetts and also a bigger university in Boston for a couple years. But they were not open to biblical principles. You were supposed to leave religion outside. I was lecturing one day to actually a class of nurses or pre-nurses, and we're talking about sexually transmitted diseases. And I said, if you don't mess around, you're not going to have to worry about sexually transmitted diseases. And a girl in the middle of the class says, "Are you for real?"
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
I said, "I'm for real, and if you read your textbook, it says the same thing."
And it works 100% of the time.
That's right. That's right.
But it was just interesting. It was much more exciting and interesting. I had a chance to start working with the churches up there in New England about the same time. And I realized this is really where I'd like to be, to focus my energies in something that's practical, it's worthwhile, and it's going to affect a lot of lives. Because I was teaching a health education class that was a required class, so half the kids didn't want to be there. But in services, you can explain biblical principles. You can bring all this in. I had a MD came in. I was teaching the class one time on preventing alcohol and tobacco abuse.
Okay.
So I had a physician come in, and he said, "Now, what's this class all about?" I said, "Look, what I'm trying to do is educate people not to smoke, not to abuse alcohol." He said, "I'd like to trade you jobs." He was a thoracic surgeon. He was cutting people's lungs out every day that were smokers.
Wow.
I said, "You want to trade jobs?" I said, "Would you trade salaries?" He said, "Well, that's another
Maybe
story." That's another story.
Yeah.
But this is where the book I bought earlier, and I bought the book because it was 2 volumes, and I wanted to build my library on the history of medicine. But it was the ideas and the contrast that I saw there that really helped me focus in a direction.
Well, that's interesting. That probably leads us then to what we wanted to ask in terms of how did you actually come into the truth? You've talked about being brought up in a way that the Bible already meant something to you, and then noticing this in the book. What was it that when God actually opened your mind to the truth in terms of His church, the larger body of truth? What was that like? How did that happen?
My brother, 2 years younger than I was, attended Bricket Wood, our campus over there, for 2 years.
Okay.
Or for a year. He came home for a summer vacation when I came home after my first year in graduate school. And I knew it was at some sort of religious school, but I couldn't figure out why he would do that. So while we were at home, I'd bought a set of philosophy books, and he said, "What'd you buy that junk for?" I said, "What do you mean junk?" He said, he didn't have a lot of good things to say. So I started reading the booklets that he gave me, but I was also reading, studying history of medicine at the same time. But I read in the Bible and also in this book on history of medicine that one of the kings in the ancient Israel, when he was diseased, he sought to the physicians and not to the priest. But then he died. But the book on the history of medicine didn't say what happened. The assumption was, well, he just called a doctor. No, he did not look to God. And that was the thing. But that caught my attention. And I started reading more in the correspondence course, reading more of the booklets. But it pointed me in a different direction. I spent my last 3 years in graduate school really doing a lot of study on the Sabbath, on the holy days, because my department chairman at that time, he says, "Leave your books at school when you go home." So I took him literally. And I'd go home and read the Bible and read the correspondence course and learn a lot of things like that. But when I graduated, he wanted to hire me there or place me someplace in a good job. And I said, "I think I'm going to go to a school out in California." He said, "You are going to commit professional suicide if you do that."
Wow.
Because it was religious school. But I never regretted it. I taught in Pasadena for about 10 years, and I taught anatomy, physiology, biology, some courses on conservation, environmental things. But that was the point. And then I went back to school and got a Master of Public Health degree. And then I started working with the church. And I found that was really much more interesting. Because once I learned about the church, I wanted to be part of the work, and it didn't matter where, but I wanted to do something worthwhile.
Right.
Share one other little story. One of the kids I went to college with, he was the vice president of Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. Now, they had a bunch of vice presidents, but he was Greek, and we've stayed in touch over the years. And I met him in London for dinner one time. He said, "Now, Doug, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, George, I'm a minister." He said, "You preach?" Because in college, I was very active on campus, and I wasn't into religion. I said, "Yes, I do, and I write articles on world events and so on." He said, "I was just down in Greece trying to get a rich lady to put her money in our bank."
Really?
He said, "You're doing something worthwhile."
Nice. That's very encouraging.
When people realize, let's put it this way, if you grow up in the church, sometimes we take for granted, well, I'm just in the church, and this is just so-and-so, and I'm here. When people outside the church that I have stayed in contact with through college, through graduate school, when they learn what I'm doing, they just kind of sit back and like, wow,
Yes.
that's really different.
It's so interesting to me how God took your varied interests, your interest in history and health and interest in the Bible, and like this kind of sublime blending of your expertise to use you in this way. It's a very interesting mix, very encouraging.
Draw you to him, and then use you also to be able to do the very things you wanted to do, but for his people, and in that environment.
I think what we all need to realize is that God has called us. Jesus said, "I'm going to prepare a place for you." That's not just for me or for you. He's calling a small group of people today to prepare them to reign with Jesus Christ in the coming kingdom of God. But Jesus said, "I'm going to prepare a place for you." We read in 1 Corinthians 12, I think it is, where God places us in the work, in the body, as it pleases him. If we can let God work with us, take advantage of the opportunities that you have, because the body has many parts. You got eyes and ears and nose and toes and whatever. He has a place for us. If we let God work with us, we've all been given different talents and different abilities. God didn't call a bunch of yellow pencils. He's called us with different talents. And if we let God work with us and ask him, "God, what do you want to do with me? What talents and abilities do I have?" And as parents, encourage your kids to try a lot of different things. I tried horseback riding. I enjoyed it. I tried a lot of sports because the opportunities were there. Just getting outside. Today we've got to raise kids in urban environments where it's not safe to go outside. When I was growing up, this farm behind us, we could wander around all day long. It was safe. Nobody bothered us. I had a cousin that grew up in the city, and they visited us. We walked up through the pasture, and there was big round things on the grass with cow droppings. And she said, "What is that?" I said, "It's a rock. If you stand on it, you can see forever."
Oh, boy.
And she chased me after that.
I'm sure she did. Yeah.
But if we develop the talents and abilities that God has given us, and then let him place us where he wants to place us. And some of the experiences we're going to go through as God guides us are not going to be fun. They're going to be challenging. But, before Dr. Meredith died, and he died of prostate cancer, he said, "I want to learn every lesson I can learn as I go through this experience." And if we're in situations that we don't like, ask God to help you learn and just hang on, get through it. We're told that only those that endure to the end are going to receive a reward. But if we can learn, and if our focus is on serving other people, how can I develop my talents and abilities to serve anybody? And it might not be in the church, it might be on your job. Your example is going to be important, but develop those talents and abilities.
Yeah, what you said reminds me of Mr. Weston when he went through his back pain. But you know something about back pain as well. But when he was going through that, and we're talking to him on the phone, and you'll remember because he mentioned at lunch as well. I think he said that, "Hey, thank you for praying for me. but also please pray that I learn whatever lessons I need to learn from this. Not just to make it go away, but because God is allowing him to experience it, and what lessons are there to learn. And I appreciate your encouragement to everybody to, don't be so, learn all the things you can if God is here training you. Your example is interesting. You did follow an interest, but you developed skills and you developed talents and you developed abilities that God was able to use eventually. It wasn't like you first started thinking, well, one day I'll teach at a religious college, and so I better learn about biology and I better learn. No, you actually developed yourself. But then in developing yourself, you may not have realized it at the time, but you were creating something God would be able to use later in some kind of way. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that's what you're encouraging for our younger listeners is, focus on developing yourself, building your skills, and then letting God worry about how he might use that one day. But do focus on developing yourself and becoming able to help other people with your skills.
We have a perspective once you come to understand the truth of God. Through college, a lot of the guys that were going into medicine and dentistry and so on, they wanted to serve, but they also have good incomes. And that was one of the motivations. When I went to graduate school, we walked around the hospital with white coats on. And even the nurses said, well, good morning, doctor, good morning, doctor. We weren't doctors, but we had white coats on. And it's a vanity thing. You feel very important. But with the perspective that we are preparing to reign with Jesus Christ in the coming kingdom of God, if we can develop this concept of how can I serve, how can I help solve problems? Medications are not going to solve the world's problems. You have to learn how to live to prevent those things. Healing is a forgiveness of sin, which when you break the laws of God, then there will be consequences. I think one of the lessons that both Mr. West and I have learned, because we compare notes every day. How are you today? Right now.
Has the warranty run out on anything today? Yeah.
But we both learned that exercise is important. You've got to develop, in our cases, with back problems. I wasn't eating the way I should have. I didn't have enough protein and things like that. So I dealt with my body. The bones are degenerating a bit, osteoporosis. But we both found that exercising, abdominal muscles, bending over, stretching, and so on, you just have to do those things. If we don't do those things, then there will be consequences. So we're both making pretty much the same adjustments, and we're both having pretty good results so far.
Oh, good. Every once in a while, people will ask me how you're doing. Well, how's Dr. Winnail doing? I say, well, he's standing up straight. I think it's a good day. One thing we like to bring up sometimes with those who've been through it, and you were through it. You were actually at the location of some of these things. A lot of our younger listeners, what happened in the Worldwide Church of God is foreign to them. They don't have an experience of having been a part of a group, and you're all teaching the truth. You think you're all together, and then next thing you know, you're not. And so you did go through those times in the Worldwide Church of God, and were even connected to the college and some of those times. Would you be able to speak to them a little bit about how that experience was, and how did you decide what to do afterwards? That is, where suddenly there's this group or that, there's decisions to be made, and you had to make a decision that eventually, of course, landed you here talking with us at this table. If you could kind of let them know a little bit about that, I think they'd probably appreciate it.
Okay, I went to a bastard college, and I taught there for about 10 years. And some of the men who led the rebellion were my students. Some of them were peers that I taught with. When things began to change, I was actually teaching in Big Sandy, and it was very obvious they were bringing in Protestant doctrines, because that's where I came from. I spent 25 years growing up with that. So when things began to change, it was kind of easy for me, because I'd been out in the world, I'd taught at different places. This was just a repeat. They were throwing away fundamental truths, the identity of Israel, the Sabbath, the holy day. They were just thrown away because they wanted to join the Protestant mainstream.
And that was really apparent to you.
It was very apparent, but it was not apparent to younger people. What surprises me was that it was I think it was apparent to others, even in the ministry at that time, because they'd come through Ambassador College. They saw what was happening, but they needed a paycheck. And they're just very blunt. They needed a paycheck, so they stayed. I had actually met Dr. Meredith the first time I went to Pasadena just to look around, even before I was a student. So we met, we talked, and I've known him for 30 years. He hadn't changed anything. When he left, he started preaching again, got back on radio, back on television, while others were sitting around, well, what should we do? What should we do? He knew what to do. So to work with him again was a privilege. It's interesting, Mr. Weston and I were in college at the same time, the same spokesman's club. He was interested in a girl, and I was interested in another one, so we never got acquainted. But he went to the field. He was out there. I stayed in Pasadena for a while, and then we wound up sort of connected. He was a regional director up in Canada. I was the boss in CAD, and he came down here, and now I'm working for him. But it's been a privilege. But our focus for both of us has been on how can we work together, how can we do the work. What I've noticed over the years is that people that want a position, they want to get into a position, usually wind up losing that position or drifting away. But if our focus is on doing the work that we have to do, personalities, we're not all going to think the same way, but we've got to work towards the same direction. But it's been a privilege working in CAD. The staff that we work with here, I think we all get along pretty good.
Yes.
I don't sense the cutthroat. They're going to be electing a new pope, but they lock those guys into a room until they come up with a decision. Some of the same things happened as the church was coming apart. There were pre-meetings before council meetings, and who's going to do this and who that. I don't sense any of that anymore.
One of the things people may not know about your how you've administered things in CAD that I always really appreciated was, you cared when you needed to make moves or rearrange personnel. You cared where people wanted to go, where they had family. You factored that in. You accommodated where you could. Occasionally, it's like, hey, I need a guy here. But I was really impressed with how much you tried hard to help the ministers go to an area that works best for them. I mean, there's many factors in that kind of thing, but also for the feast, very accommodating and trying to help men go, especially with families. And I guess there's not actually a question in there.
Well, I think it is good to say. I know that matches my experience too. I remember one of the moves for me. You sat me down in your office and you confirmed that we were homeschooling our kids, which we were, and you looked at possibilities and asked me to look into the homeschooling regulations in different states because you really wanted to know, and I really appreciated that investment. In particular, I remember early in my pastoral career mentioning something in a sermon that really caught someone sideways, and they wrote in about it and wrote you about it, and I was just mortified. I don't want to cause any. Last thing I want is everybody at headquarters to be upset about what dumb Wally Smith has said, somewhere out there. And I was writing back and forth with you, and you were so encouraging. You gave an example to me of a mistake you'd made before. I didn't think what you said was a mistake, but regardless, someone had gotten worked up years ago. And then you wrote me in an email. You said, well, the Bible says, whatever our hand finds to do, do it with all your might, ... even your mistakes. I thought anyway, it was really encouraging. And it was just, I've always felt just very supported with you. And it does reflect, I think, you mentioned the atmosphere there in church administration. And, if they say like a fish stinks from the head down, if it weren't that way, then you'd be the person to talk to. But it's quite the opposite. It just seems like a good team there. Yep. Everyone seems happy to work together. It seems like a really nice environment, and appreciate what you do there in church administration. This might be, we did want you, and you've already touched on some of those things, but before we do wrap up with you, just to give you the opportunity, knowing that you've got teens and young adults listening, is there any particular advice you'd want to pass along? I mean, all of us here get our time behind the lectern, in sermons and such, but still, knowing that you have a younger audience listening, if there's anything in particular you'd love to pass on, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, let me go back to both of your comments about working with CAD.
Oh, sure.
My job, I do not view my job as telling everybody else what to do. My job is to serve, to be supportive. Whenever we were moving from Massachusetts down to Georgia, the fellow that was over church administration at that time, we had actually been in Spokesman's Club or in Ambassador Club together. And he said, "You need to move. Now, where would you like to move?" And my son Scott was starting college at that time, and he had spotted a couple programs, but one particularly in Athens, Georgia. And I said, "Would really like to be in Athens, if that would work." But he gave me that opportunity as opposed to you're going here and you're going there and whatever. You know, in the past, we've moved some people. I think Mr. Ames said he moved 23 times.
Wow.
Moving is one of the most stressful experiences that a family can have, especially. And we're sitting behind a desk, and it's much better to get input from where would you like to go, where's your family? Families are important.
Yes.
And if we can take that into consideration, we're just showing love and concern to other people.
Yeah.
But it's been a privilege. Rod and I talked this morning, Mr. McNair, and he said, "I really like working with you." And I said, "Well, I like working with you too."
Sometime I got to tell you, I like working with Mr. Robinson. I just
It's been a while. If I may echo, Mr. McNair is actually pretty incredible. Like how he keeps everything straight and what he gets done, and he's so even keeled. He's definitely a blessing in CAD and on down in the church in that way.
Well, we were just discussing this morning, his job, and I really appreciate what he and the staff do because they're in the computers, organizing structure and everything. And my job has devolved basically to visiting congregations, spending time with the ministers and the wives in the field. And it's really been a privilege. Some people look at my schedule, well, you traveled around the world all these times. You get on a plane and sit there for 15 hours. But when you arrive, I got to South Africa last time and somebody said, "Welcome home."
Yeah.
That's neat.
That's very neat.
It blows you away.
Yeah. I for what it's worth, because this is more just my opinion than anything else, I actually always admired that you did get out and travel, that a representative from headquarters was out getting around the globe, like literally getting around the globe, visiting all the congregations. And some congregations that are difficult to get to aren't going to get a lot of visitors. And you did, and it would help remind people who are a little more far-flung that they are a part of a larger work. And you as an ambassador in that way, I think, has probably been pretty important to.
Yeah.
2 bits of advice. This is going to sound strange, but one of the reasons for getting out in the field, George Patton was an effective general because he got his hands dirty. He got out into the field. He didn't sit behind a desk. Also, Bob Ligg is an older minister who's now dead, but we were friends. He said, "Doug, you need to call the ministers regularly." In terms of having some advice, I would encourage the listeners to seek first the kingdom of God. In other words, set your goals on being in the kingdom. Prepare for that. That gives you a focus. Keeping in mind, Jesus said, "I'm going to prepare a place for you." And if you can prepare and let God work with you, He will place you, and He will give you the experiences that you need. A couple of other things, Mr. Armstrong used to emphasize this all the time. Prove that God exists. Don't just assume it. Go through the booklet that we have, but prove it to yourself so that you know. And then develop a relationship with God. Talk with Him. You got big decisions to make, pray about it. God, open the door where I need to be, close it where I don't need to be. You're dating somebody, ask God for advice. Don't just go off on your own. Prove that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. It's not like any other book. But once you've proven it, then live by it. Use that to guide your decisions. Prove where God's church is. Develop a relationship with God, but prove where God's church is. And you prove that by who is doing the mission, who is carrying out the work. But we can be carrying out the work, but not treat people like Christians. We can become very judgmental. But prove where God's church is. And then prepare to serve. As we've talked about, several times here. Prepare to serve wherever you are, and let God use you. Ask God, what do you want to do with me? Prepare me for however you want to use me so we can be instruments in your hands. We've got a tremendous opportunity ahead of us. If you let God work with you, He will prepare you to be a very useful instrument in His hands. And part of that's going to be guided by your interests, your aptitudes, your abilities, but you can learn how to do things to serve other people. And I think that's what I'd like to leave everybody with.